Ladies and gentlemen, let's ready ourselves for a conversation on what are the disruptions that are awaiting South Africa's payments landscape. And given those disruptions, what then is the roadmap to the future? To moderate this panel discussion is Dr. Melanie de Jager. She is a Program Delivery Director in the Executive Management Department at the Reserve Bank here at the South African Reserve Bank. I'm going to invite her to come up and she will then introduce her panelists. Let's give her a really good energy and a round of applause as she comes up.
She's going to call you one by one. Okay.
Let's make sure that Melanie's audio's on. Try again, please.
Okay, is the audio better? Oh. All right, good morning, everyone. It's a huge privilege for me to be standing here today. But the privilege is really to share some really exciting things with you around the payments ecosystem modernization journey that we're embarking on. But the other part of the privilege is sharing the stage with a really exciting panel. So before we go into the details, I just want to introduce the panel to you. I'm going to start with Mr. Pradeep Maharaj. He's the Chief Operating Officer of the South African Reserve Bank, but he's also the Executive Director for the Payments Ecosystem Modernization. So two really big portfolios. Pradeep, welcome to the stage. All right, next up is an individual that certainly needs no introduction. Tim Masela is the head of the National Payment Systems Department at the SARB, a position that he's been in since August 2012. So many, many years, an absolute specialist and expert and globally renowned for his knowledge on payments. Tim, you're welcome. And then last but certainly not least, the other lady on the panel, Geeta Erling, is the CEO of the Payments Association of South Africa, another individual that needs no introduction, deep expertise in payments, and a privilege to have you on stage with us. Welcome, Geeta. All right, take a seat. So this morning, we've heard about several big things that are happening in the payments landscape. And we know that disruption is the key theme for the era that we are entering from a payments point of view. So the panel this morning will share with us some ideas and some insights around some of those big disruptions that we can expect to see over the next number of years in the South African and Southern African payments landscape. So just to get us warmed up, and to get us into it, the previous act is a hard act to follow, so maybe we just want to get ourselves settled. To the panel, and I'm going to start with you, Geeta. If each of you can maybe just give us the one or two biggest disruptions that you believe we will be seeing in the payments landscape over the next number of years.
So, you know, Melanie, when I started in payments, it used to be that as long as the CEO's card worked, when he took his investment banking clients to lunch, and as long as your systems didn't fall over in the festive season, over month end, the business made money, everything was fine. You were a quiet little back office space, you were a technical environment, a bit of a dark art, no one worried too much about you. What's happened and is happening is that suddenly payments are becoming front and center. And there are two things in my view that are driving that conversation. The first is, and I think the word weaponizing is a bit too strong, but payment systems are being used, crime prevention, anti-money laundering, they're being used to enforce sanctions, and suddenly there's a whole geopolitical element that's coming to play, and actually at the same time systems becoming more vulnerable to attack because of those elements. The second thing, and I think the governor covered it this morning, is that increasingly there's a recognition that digital payments can lead to a developmental agenda. They can alleviate poverty. They can play a role in growing GDP. And because of that, the entire dynamic around how payments are being looked at is changing on a fairly global scale. That's underpinned with, and I'm going to be a bit naughty and say a third thing, that's underpinned by an environment where not only are the margins trending towards zero, but actually the fees are trending towards zero. So now we have this massive new complexity, this regulatory burden, this developmental agenda at the same time as the traditional plumbing no longer makes money. And that adds massive complexity to the overall environment. And I don't think those three trends are going to change anytime soon.
Great, thank you, Geeta. And I agree with you. There's so many different parts of disruption that we need to face that really complicates this environment in a significant way. Tim, your views?
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks to our audience. I believe that we're moving into a space where we need to embrace the platform approach in terms of setting out infrastructure that would actually benefit the broader system. And I believe that in that, there's building blocks that you can actually plug in that would actually ensure that they handle some of the frictions that we find in the system and those compounding issues of speed, cost, and whatever. And that is something that we, if we pull together, we can ensure that we build the foundation where competition could thrive on top in terms of products and services. And this is something that I think we already initiating a conversation, at least in our own jurisdiction, based on even the previous conversation of the issues that we're experiencing. I believe we actually can leverage that and make a huge impact. Of course, there's a call for regulators as well to put their hand in and ensure that the environment is enabled, or we create an enabling environment. Mm-hmm. And that task, I believe, the regulators take, but will actually converse further because the regulatory sector is broad. It's not only one regulator, and there's sometimes sort of conflicting policy objectives where we need to strike trade-offs. And I believe we are up to the task to ensure that we handle that.
Great, thanks, Tim. And I think we'll delve a bit deeper into the regulatory conversation in a little bit. Pradeep.
Yeah, I suppose for me, the biggest disruption we're going to face over the next few years is the drive to create a smart cash society. And one that provides digital options seamlessly with physical options for payments that allows for us to drive social development and economic growth in this country. Over 30 years, we have not addressed financial inclusion to the levels that we would like, and we got to think differently about how we try to address that. And in doing that, we're seeing the next phase of a revolution in infrastructure across the globe. A couple of centuries ago, it was all about roads and railways and so forth to connect people to create an interconnected world. Today, we're seeing the drive for digital infrastructure that will create the backbone for a different society. And in that regard, digital payments infrastructure is going to be a critical driving force for the smart cash society. And regulators around the world have started to look at this differently and see how best we can play a catalyst role in creating this public digital infrastructure that is in the public good in order to drive this digitization that will ensure better social development outcomes as a country.
All right, thanks, Pradeep. And I think thinking differently is probably the one thing I want to put emphasis on. The world is changing rapidly. We heard it through most of the conversations that we've had this morning. And we always say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So as regulators, I suppose we need to start thinking differently and thinking a lot more in an agile manner. And I know it's a word that's being abused grossly. but we'll delve into those concepts in a little bit. So I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable now that we've gone through round number one. So Geeta, maybe let's pick on some of the concepts. We've spoken about a platform approach. We've spoken about public digital infrastructure. And some of these concepts are very nebulous, especially if you're not technology-oriented, if I may. But it's not just about tech, and that message has come through very clearly through most of the conversations we've had this morning. So there is a concept that's emerging and that's taking the world by storm, if I may, around a fourth generation payments platform architecture. Now that's really big and it sounds really sexy, but I suppose we need to unpack that a little bit. So if we think about people wanting faster, cheaper, immediate payments, we need to also think about how we architect our payments platforms of the future to be able to accommodate for those needs. So Geeta, I hope it's not an unfair question, but can you help us better understand the concept of a fourth generation unified payments platform? And what does it mean in practice for us in the payments world?
It's quite interesting in proving that I'm not totally divorced from tech. I first did a Google search on fourth generation open payment platforms. And in the first 10 items, there are at least 4 different descriptions. I then asked ChatGPT. ChatGPT just gave me a list of 10 kind of factors that it had to have. And then I decided, throw it all away, let's talk about what matters here. So some of you might remember the Project Future work that we did a few years ago that was a precursor to imagining what we've built on PayShop. And in that environment, what came out of that study was what I would call a new age architecture that talks to a modularized environment, so you can reuse, for example, common overlay services on different payment systems. You can quickly adapt the environment without necessarily having to touch all of your core functionality. Orchestration layers that allow you to manage the different streams, the different complexities, obviously API interfaces that democratize access, stability, robust, secure, real-time, ISO 20022, all the buzzwords. And actually, in the last few months, we've gone back and looked at what PayShop delivered and said, did it start delivering this architecture? And the answer we got to was largely yes. And we'd like to think that that is a future-fit, modern generation architecture that allows us to do all of these things. But the interesting part in this conversation for me is the platform piece. And the platform piece is not actually about technology. And I'd like to preface that comment by saying that in the last decade, maybe more, technology has simply not been the limiting factor when it comes to anything we want to do in payments, whether it comes to processing capability, capacity. We talked about AI earlier. It's not an issue. The technology can almost do more than we can imagine. The challenge is around the business models that allow this to happen and the commercials that underpin it and the regulation that enables it. So when we come to platforms, we typically talk about creating an open ecosystem where providers and suppliers can play, can find each other, can innovate, can develop new services and offerings. Now, arguably, payments were there years ago. If you look at the card systems that emerged, in the 1960s, last century, we were already to some extent building those platform environments through interoperability. And the irony of this is that in some instances, the platform also becomes the problem. Because going back to my earlier comments about jurisdiction matters now, geopolitical constructs, global alliances now matter. We sit in a world where there are some platforms that are more powerful than the economies we're sitting in. And it's very easy to imagine a world where a platform that offers all the services has its own bespoke payment system only for its environment. And that brings a whole bunch of undesirable outcomes as well. There's privacy issues, there's issues around misinformation and how that gets managed. And so while the platform model is the model, the challenge, I think, for all of us is to build platform models that truly incorporate interoperability without building monopolies. And again, I think it was covered very nicely in this morning's conversation about when should government own the monopoly versus when should the market be allowed to play. And I think the balance between those is going to be quite core to this whole fourth generation platform conversation. And how do we make it work for South Africa and the risks around this increasingly splintered world that we find ourselves in?
All right. So Geeta, you've implied your answer, but I'm going to ask you explicitly. Is South Africa ready for this future-focused platform?
So the technology's there, but the regulation, and Tim, you're going to talk to that, as you've said, it is core to this. You know, the technology will allow us to talk to any store of value. The fact that you build a modularized architecture means you can move to more open banking type models where a third party transacts on a store of value held in a deposit-taking institution. The technology is, as always, the easy part. It's the how do we create the environment that actually allows this to happen. So technically, yes. We were just talking backstage. I personally believe there's quite a lot we can do even before legislative changes to make the environment more friendly and more suitable to these kind of models. But it's absolutely the enabling framework that's necessary.
Right, thank you, Geeta. So Tim, it looks like we're going to have to talk about the elephant in the room today, and that's the legislation and the regulatory situation that we're faced with. So we know that in South Africa, we've been at it to change regulation and change legislation for quite a long time. I think, Tim, it started in 2018, thereabouts, even before that. So it's been in the making for a while. And it's been such a long journey that some of us may have forgotten what the intent was with these regulatory reforms that we had targeted from the outset. So maybe, Tim, if you can help us with a little bit of a history lesson and just remind those of us that haven't been close to this process, what was the initial thinking around the regulatory reforms? Why did we believe that they are necessary, and what did we anticipate to get out of those?
Yeah, indeed, I think we would like to say that we would have hoped that at this point in time we should have made headway in terms of changing the legislation. But I don't think we can harp on that because there's things that we believe we can do within the current legislation. As you know, the approach towards changing legislation is to ensure that it's living to the times and ensures that the system is enabled, the public policy objectives are achieved, and at the back of our mind, we don't lose this fact that with that legislation, the products and services that are brought to the table should be commercially viable and sustainable. Now, we went on a journey, Melanie, to change some of the provisions in our law. Our law has actually sustained us for a long time. And we believe as well that we shouldn't have too much detail in the law. It should be principle-based at a high level, and you should have tools around to manage the changed circumstances. But of course, I'll just indicate that in the current proposed changes, as colleagues would be aware, based on the policy paper that we published leading to the changes to the law, it was issues relating to level playing field, access to the system, ensuring that the regulatory architecture is adjusted from what it is at the moment, where we had, or maybe we taken as having delegated things that we shouldn't have delegated, taking those back into the central bank, but ensuring that the system meets all the key principles. Issues like interoperability. We have fragmented systems that are all over, and sometimes they are caused by the fact that maybe access is inhibited. And all those changes we have embedded in the proposed bill. But I want to take a few steps back and say, I cannot indicate when the bill will be passed, but I can indicate that we're doing everything to ensure that we navigate the terrain to achieve the objectives that we would achieve with changing the law within the current legal framework. If we talk to issues of access, we interrogated how that can be achieved within the current law, although the new law would have made it easier. And we are making headways, I would believe, in terms of how we can achieve this access issue. Starting from the morning, there's the issue of cash that is well infested in the system, innovation that is inhibited, and we should do everything within the current law to ensure that we get there. But I need to indicate that in the regulatory space, we're not the only one. We're dealing with transactions, and there's many other regulators with interest in ensuring that their objectives are also met. So I will believe that regulatory alignment amongst the various regulators would also go a long way in ensuring that we have this enabled environment or enabling environment that the providers of the services and the innovators can leverage to develop products and services that could go a long way in meeting the needs of the transacting public, as well as meeting the balance of the objectives of all the regulators. So, in terms of changes to the law, we believe that our focus now is on enabling what we wanted to see. There's some aspects that we cannot achieve with that. For instance, where we're talking about the powers that we had delegated that we want to take back, we can only do that once we realize the new law, but we can navigate this terrain and ensure that the system is not constrained in the meanwhile. Mm-hmm. So I believe that we are close to at least opening the access path. And in terms of innovation and enabling innovation, colleagues would know through the IFWG and the innovation work that we collaborating with other state organs, we are doing everything to ensure that we embrace the innovation and we are not inhibiting, and we are able to ensure that new services come to the fore.
Great, thank you, Tim. And we appreciate the fact that we don't have that control over the process. And you've alluded to some of those things, but can you give us a couple of practical examples of things we can do within the current construct to start taking the world of payments forward? We can't wait another 5, 10 years. The world is moving on quite rapidly, and I think we do need to start thinking very creatively around what is possible given the constraints that we have today.
Yeah, I mean, if we just take the flavor of the day of instant payments, which is what everybody is calling for, and ensuring that we bring competition into the space, we believe within the current legal framework, we would be able to open the system for parties that meet the requirements to provide the services to come in. And this we will do through the retail offerings. I think the only restriction that maybe we won't pass is opening a settlement account in the central bank without changing the law. But there's a lot that we can do around that, and we would still restrict settlement accounts in the central bank to banks, and as defined, all the categories of institutions as defined in the Act. But for access to settlement of retail fast payments, we can do it without changing that Act. And we may even change the Act and leave that construct into perpetuity if it is the most effective way of enabling that. So we would allow settlement of retail transactions not necessarily to happen in the RTGS. And that construct is viable. We believe we have examples of jurisdictions where they've done it in that way, and it works. And we believe it should work for us. Of course, there would be issues of, and maybe this is what confronts me to say, when we have enabled that, would the non-banks really come? I believe so. I cannot guarantee it, but I believe so. And in further engagements, and I think the work that we are undertaking as a central bank, we seized with the issues that says we need, from the conversation of this morning, proportionality. We don't need to lower the standards. We need proportionality. But we need to ensure that we put mechanisms in place that removes onerous requirements that could be inhibiting other parties to come into the system as well.
Excellent. I'm sure that should actually get a good hand. I think access is the big issue for us, isn't it? All right. Thank you, Tim. So often when we talk about progressing the agenda and the objectives of the Payments Ecosystem Modernization Initiative, which is really, as the Governor has pointed out, a very ambitious endeavor to move the payments of South Africa into the next generation. We have to consider whether or not the changes that we had anticipated in the law is adequate to accommodate for this future construct. The reality is that the PEM kind of took the world by storm, and when these changes were proposed, it didn't take into consideration the objectives of the Payments Ecosystem Modernization. Should we consider pulling back what has been done and re-looking that, or do you believe that the changes are in fact robust enough to accommodate this future world?
Yeah, I think my only challenge is that the changes that we're putting forward, I wish they sat at the right level so that they don't go into detail that you need to change the law all the time. They should be calibrated at principle level, right level, and we have the tools around to manage the situation. If we achieve that, we will be actually having a very good piece of legislation that doesn't need parliamentarians and the delays that we are experiencing at the moment. And I believe it's achievable. We should just ensure that we only have in the law what could sustain us in a long time and doesn't need to change from time to time, and have the tools around to manage the changing circumstances.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. So I suppose that the trick here is getting the principles right, getting the framework to a level where it can accommodate any changes into the future, and thinking creatively around what is possible within the constraints that we have today. All right, Pradeep, let's move to you. So I suppose that the majority of the people in the room has had the opportunity to get a glimpse into the Payments Ecosystem Modernization concept and the different components that we envisage to implement over the next 3 to 5 years towards modernizing the payments ecosystem. One of the elements of this very ambitious journey is the implementation of a digital financial identity for all individuals in the country. And I'm underscoring all because we're not just focusing on citizens, but also people within the borders of this country that is transacting today using different means. But like a fourth generation payments platform, the concept of a digital financial ID is a fairly nebulous one. So can you maybe help us understand the concept of DFID a little bit better?
Yeah, so let me try and explain this using a practical example. If today when I came to this conference, I got a reminder on my phone finally that actually it's my anniversary today. And of course, in my normal way, I forgot about it and didn't do anything
anniversary.
about it. And so I see this flowers here, and I think, oh, that'll make a good gift to take home. And I established that you're the owner of these flowers. I take out 100 Rand and I exchange value for those flowers. In that transaction, in the physical world, you see me, you identify me with all my imperfections. I recognize and I establish that you are the rightful owner of this, and therefore we can transact. In a digital world, you need to replicate that. And in order for a secure transaction to take place, I need to be able to firstly identify who the payer and the payee is. I need to be able to authenticate the pay. So identifying the pay and pay is defining who am I. And who am I is made up of a set of, it's biographical, so my name, my date of birth, potentially my address, and so forth. There are a whole lot of attributes that define who I am in some way. And then there are biometric attributes that will allow me to be fully identified in a digital world. The fingerprints, could be my facial recognition, could be my eyes, my iris, which could be read by devices. And putting those two together defines who am I in the digital world. Then you have the next step of that process, which is authenticating me. Am I who I say I am in a transaction? And you need confirmation of that. If we had to do this transaction digitally, we need to be able to authenticate each other in the transaction. So when I hit the button to pay you the 100 rands for these flowers, the funds actually go into your store of value and not into Tim's, right? And so that needs to be done. And of course, you need a system that then allows for that to happen. And so then you need an authorization phase of this, where you use our digital identities in order to transact. And that is then the third part of a digital financial ID. And the first two are foundational identity, and the last one is a functional identity. So I use my who am I, and am I who I say I am, and that gives me certain rights and allows me to do certain things in a digital world. And that is then the authorization of a service or a transaction or whatever it is. And so you need all three to work. And it is absolutely necessary if you want to build a fast payment system, which is what the SARB is looking to do, is to, as part of its modernization journey of the ecosystem, is to build a fast payment system that will replace me paying you physically with cash to pay digitally. And in order to pay digitally, when I hit the button, the money must be irrevocably in your account, and so that we can exchange value. At the moment, if I hit the button and it's through my bank account to your bank account, the money only hits your bank account tomorrow if we don't bank at the same bank. And my anniversary is today. I can't take the flowers tomorrow. Besides, if I pay you the 100 rand, I must be able to come back and pick up the flowers tomorrow. Otherwise, and if you're not going to be here, then I don't have the flowers again. So you need to be able to enable that, and that's really what we want to do in this ecosystem. However, we can only do that if we have a digital financial ID that allows us to firstly identify who we are, authenticate who we are, and then authorize for transactions to take place in real time, all the time. So that, because transactions take place 24/7, 365 days in the year, so you need to be able to cover that.
Right, so it's identify, authenticate, transact. Simple enough, thank you. Now I even get it. So Pradeep, I suppose then the question becomes that identity in this country is within the remit of the Department of Home Affairs. And are we not stepping over a boundary if we start looking at digital identity as the central bank, as opposed to leaving that work to the Department of Home Affairs?
So I've tried to explain that there's a identify, there's a authenticate, and then there's a authorize. What we need in order for digital transactions to take place is a functional ID system, okay, which is built on foundational ID components. The reality of today is that Department of Home Affairs have issued roughly 30 million smart cards. which means that they have roughly 30 million South Africans biographical information and biometric information available. Okay? So the first problem we have with that is that it doesn't cover all South Africans. Because my grandchild, who is 5 years old, she transacts when she goes to school. She goes to the tuck shop and she gets a few things. So she's transacting, so which means that not everyone is captured in the Home Affairs system. There's only 30 million South Africans. The second element of the Home Affairs system at the moment is that it doesn't give you access to a database of people that are not born in this country, who are active in the economy. And so if you're leaving out half the citizens of this country and everyone that is not a citizen but is in this country, whether legally or illegally, it doesn't matter, they're transacting. They're actually using our cash for transacting, and we want to bring them into the digital world. So that element is missing. So the database is not complete. The second element of the Home Affairs system is that it's not available 24/7, 365 days of the year. The reliability of that system, a lot of you in the financial sector use the system to when you do KYC for your customers, that the Home Affairs system is not reliable. And so if we want to bring digital transactions to 60% of South Africans rely on cash for the daily transactions, then we have to build a digital financial ID that captures both the foundational and the functional ID. If not, again, we'd be stuck in this construct where we only provide services to a very small portion of the people of this country.
So just help me understand this then. What's the difference between a national identity and a digital financial identity?
So the first two elements of the systems are exactly the same. A foundational ID system which is about who am I, so identifies me and authenticates me. That's what a digital national ID system is. A functional ID system is what you build on top of that, which is about the authorization. What am I allowed to do in the system? So whether it's for health, whether it's for social welfare, whether it's for my driver's license, each functional ID system should leverage this foundational. Okay? So, and we're going to build all three of them because the foundational element of the South African ID system is not quite where it should be. However, we have begun very detailed conversations with the Department of Home Affairs to explore whether these two could coexist or should be planned in such a way that they are integrated into a single ID system into the future. And I think there we're quite far advanced in the conversations to say that, we'll start to build this as the SARB because we want to drive the digital payments transformation of the country with all of the various other elements in a public utility that will deliver this at no cost to the end user and at low cost to the participant. We will build it in a way that incorporates the foundational elements and requirements that a national ID system would need, so that in the very near future we could integrate it into a single ID system for the country. And that will be done through a public utility.
Right, thank you, Pradeep. That's very enlightening and I think very exciting. We've seen in other jurisdictions how valuable access to a digital identity is in unlocking the potential for payments. So we're really looking forward to seeing that land. So we've been talking about how we need to reimagine the architecture and create some future-focused architectures, including the operating models and the business models. And we've been talking about creating an enabling regulatory framework and a regulatory construct to support the future. We've spoken about some of those interesting technological advancements we can use to our advantage to progress payments. But Tim, and if I can pick on you for another moment, we have over the last couple of years under Vision 2025 embarked on a number of industry-wide initiatives that are in some cases quite far advanced. So how does all of these pieces of work that's been in play for a while now integrate into this new payments ecosystem modernization vision? How do we bring all of this together?
Yes, I think, Melanie, if we look at the goals of our current vision, being Vision 2025, the payment ecosystem modernization journey that we have embarked upon is aiming to advance us to achieve quite a number of those goals. And some of them, I think we need to push harder if we have to realize the ecosystem modernization, like interoperability, which is at the center of what we wanting to achieve. And we believe that the goals, the current vision SEDs, most of those goals are unlikely to change. But as we imagine the future vision beyond 2025, of which the ecosystem modernization will transcend this 2025 and take us into that horizon, we believe that we would then reimagine what needs to be done to support those goals that we have already agreed that we need to achieve. And in this respect, as maybe colleagues would be aware, we take in stock of how we have advanced in the current vision. What has been achieved, what has not been achieved, how we're going to deal with what has not been achieved. Some of the aspects going to turn into business as usual. Are some of them going to be rolled out into the future vision? And how do we navigate this? And we believe that some of the work that we see transcending being the review of the ecosystem, we already imagine that it will be part of the future vision as we actually move beyond 2025. But if I just take some of the segments of innovation and competition is one of the goals that we have in the vision. Appropriate and sound regulatory framework is what is one of the goals in the current vision. We are already advancing to lay that foundation that would actually enable the ecosystem modernization to give us the desired outcomes to realize those goals. So we actually on a train that is moving, supposed to stop in 2025, but we already have a view of how we transcend that and what we actually take beyond. And we're going to be navigating that. We even, in the conversation that we have already started, we're saying we should start framing a plan that we'll consult the industry on relating to a future vision, 2030 plus or whatever, and how that actually looks. And in the essence, we believe that the most gains that we will realize is if that vision sets the objectives. And it is very clear about where we desire the market to hold hands with us to reach that. So it's more a coordination to achieve the goals that are very clear. And the roles of the parties that are clear as to who is expected to play what role. And as you know, in terms of the payment ecosystem modernization, coming from the past, we had left the retail payment systems mostly to the private sector, but the central bank is taking a stronger role. Not that it will deliver this on its own. It needs to deliver this in a collaborative space with all the stakeholders. But it's just taking a stronger role so that we actually maintain the momentum and maybe somewhat we move with speed in order to realize that. And of course, the questions that you asked me, hinging on us from a regulatory perspective, playing our part and ensuring that we have an enabled landscape for that to be realized.
Great, thanks. Gisa, I see you want to come in on that one.
Yeah, I would like to add a bit. So the vision and the objectives are absolutely critical. And to Tim's point, I think we've done really well in articulating those. We know what we need to do as a country to solve the financial inclusion issues, etc. In some respects, this resembles the problem that you have in any large organization. Competing priorities, like it or not, limited capacity even at a country level, limited skills, and only so much change that you can push into critical systems at the same time, because you've got to balance the change with the stability. And so I think that we almost at a country level have to step into a classic strategy prioritization process that says, these are the things we're doing, because if we don't do fewer things, we won't land anything. And these are the things we're not doing. As desirable as they might be, we have to wait for higher priority or quick wins or bigger leverage opportunities. And I think that that has to be a very structured and inclusive process, because to the comments I think a number of us have made, there are opportunities to materially move this forward without necessarily massive changes or without the enabling legislation getting through Parliament. But even doing that piece of work, I think, needs to be a coordinated, follow a thorough methodology, inclusive exercise, so that we know exactly what it is we want to deliver. And it's not to say we should have a roadmap for the next 5 years, because the world changes so fast that you almost want to recalibrate every 6 months, every 12 months, whatever it takes. But that we have very clear deliverables and we focus on those, as opposed to trying to do everything at once. And I worry that as an industry, because there are so many regulators in this space, because there are different divisions, different departments, we land up with more than we can sensibly do, and then we start failing.
Thank you.
Can I just weigh in on that as well? And I suppose the one thing coming new into this area and taking responsibility for this radical transformation that we want to drive as a SARB in this space is that, you know, this country is never short of really good plans and policies and strategies. We're really good at it. And we're also really good at very collaborative, consultative processes. And what we want to do differently is keep the collaboration, keep the consultation, but actually have a bias for action. Because, you know, and we've seen it, you know, Tim makes the point that the retail payment systems have been left to the private sector. And this is not a criticism or anything else. It affects all of us, and Geeta makes the point around prioritization, and it's a network, and therefore each part has to work together in order to get the network effect, and that tends to take time. But also there's vested interests, and therefore can create long-term kinds of periods of implementation. The change we want to make is a bias for action, and take a more direct role in actually turning all of the plans and all of the strategies and all of the visions that we have, all of the policies that we have, into something meaningful and deliver something over the next 3 years. You know, so we set ourselves a very, very ambitious target. These are the 7 things we're going to do in the next 3 years and get it done. And as a PEM team, we are appointed to deliver this, at the end of which we don't have a job. You know, so there's no vested interest. Get it done. And so in that, the governor spoke about it this morning in his opening address. It's about the coalition of the willing. It's about being meaningful consultation, but actually just getting things done, rather than talking about it for another 5 years. Because the reality is we don't have another 10 years. We've spent 30 years in a democracy, and we haven't made any impact on financial inclusion. We don't have another 10 years to do it. You'll create an environment of social unrest that is far worse than what we experience today. And that's just is not an option for South Africa.
Okay, thank you. So I suppose that the emphasis here is coalition of the willing and collaborating in getting to some meaningful outcomes. All right, so we have run out of time. We've got about 6 minutes. So to the panel, I'm going to ask, start thinking about one line on what you see as success. What does success look like? And we'll close off with that. But there's about 5 minutes for questions. So any questions from the audience?
The topic of home affairs came up, and immediately in mind I started thinking, is home affairs inclusive? And then the gentleman went on and answered my question, but within the same breath, what I wanted to ask is, it sounds like the more we are wanting to modernize payments, okay, within this conversation, the more it sounds like we are wanting to operate in silos within the same country where Home Affairs has its own mandate. And I think my question is, are we fighting for inclusivity, taking into account the risks and the safety nets that Home Affairs creates in this country, which is to ensure that people are registered so that they can take accountability in some way, especially when we are looking at banks in particularly, where we say know your customer and ensure that they are registered.
Oh, there it goes again.
They are registered and have all the necessary documents. So in our fight for inclusivity, are we taking into account the mandate of Home Affairs, the safety nets that it has created within that very same mandate? Thanks.
I'm taking it that the question comes from the mandate of Home Affairs with
Okay.
the ID vis-a-vis what we're trying to achieve. And I think what I heard Pradeep saying is that we are in conversation with Home Affairs.
Yeah.
We are aligned with Home Affairs on what we would like to realize from the transacting side of the payment system, that it is not going against their mandate of responsibility for ID. So I think Pradeep can maybe weigh in, but there's collaboration and agreement that what we're doing is good for the system and supported by Home Affairs and could be leveraged in the broader picture of identification in the country while we achieve our objective.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
So we clearly, and apologies for that, I'm hearing impaired, and so absolutely got nothing of what you said, so my apologies. So I'll rely on Tim's and Gita's help in this. We are not impinging on Home Affairs' mandate. They have the mandate, they have the legal power, and we are in very serious conversations with them. The minister has just announced a digitization strategy for Home Affairs. So what we are doing is we're building a digital financial ID system that at the beginning will coexist with the Home Affairs. However, we will build it in a way that incorporates the requirements from Home Affairs as part of their digitization journey to build the identify and authenticate elements of the foundational ID system. And so that in the very short, in the short term, in the future, we could then integrate the system into a single ID system for the country. And that's really how we would work on this. Home Affairs will, in this process, issue a policy paper fairly soon around a digital ID policy, a white paper, which will then lead to legislation that will underpin that, which then gives further force to what it is we're building. However, we're going to, and when I talk about a 3-year time frame, all of the work that we have planned and that we have already started rolling out is within the current legal and legislative framework, and therefore does not rely on any amendments to any acts, because that is not in our control. And so everything we're doing, whether it's the digital financial ID, whether it's the clearing and settlement account for non-banks participating in the fast payment system, licensing of non-banks as payment service providers, that is all being done within the current legislative framework. And because otherwise we don't get any change if we only keep waiting for legislation to empower us.
Thanks, Pradeep. So unfortunately, we can't take any further questions. We're being reminded that time is up. But maybe just to close off, just one sentence from each of the panel members. What does success look like, Geeta?
That anyone in South Africa has the option to make a digital payment anytime and anywhere.
Excellent.
One
Thank you.
sentence.
Tim?
Indeed, consumers of payment services have informed and uninhibited choice.
Pradeep?
We have a smart cash society that truly leverages the potential of this country to grow.
Excellent. Thank you to the members of the panel. I think it's an ambitious few goals. Looking forward to the journey.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we give Melanie a big round of applause for an excellent job done moderating? And Pradeep to take his flowers so that his anniversary can be celebrated tonight. Thank you very much. So much that has come out of that critically important conversation. And what I loved in those final sentences, the emphasis on getting it right looks like payments anywhere, anytime. It looks like choice, and amongst many others. But to get there, we need a coalition of the willing. We need a sense of urgency that we don't have more time to spend trying to get financial inclusion right. And of course, maybe to paraphrase the question as I understood it from Zintle, can we achieve inclusion if we continue to operate exclusively? And I think that was the essence of what she was saying, and I think it was a fantastic conversation. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to invite your eyes to the screens as we take in the story of the evolution of payment systems in South Africa. And on the back of that, I will then introduce our next two speakers. Please do enjoy.
From the trading floors of our biggest commercial banks to the corner shop next door, whether it is a tap to pay for your morning coffee or a swipe to send money to Musina, to your gogo back in Kunu, to Dar es Salaam or London, the national payment system, the backbone of the economy, connects us all. The South African Reserve Bank operates, regulates, and oversees this system. And together with our industry partners, we ensure that payments, big or small, are accessible, secure, cost-effective, and efficient. Over the past 30 years, we have modernized payments. By embracing technology, we have moved from slow and manual processes to transactions that can be done at the touch of a button. In 1998, we launched the South African Multiple Option Settlement System, SAMOS, enabling secure, high-value interbank transfers and laying the groundwork for future innovations. It serves 34 participants and processes more than 17 trillion rand a month. In 2013, the Regional Cross-Border Real-Time Gross Settlement System, SADC RTGS, went live with high-value payments. It processes 17 transactions per second, connecting 88 banks across the SADC region. In 2017, DebiCheck was initiated to end abuse in the debit order payment system. It gives power to the customer to accept that a payment can go off their account. In 2022, SAMOS successfully migrated to ISO 20022, one of the first movers on the African continent to adopt the new payments messaging standard that will enable richer and more efficient payments messaging. In 2023, South Africa's instant retail payment platform PaySharp was introduced as a true immediate alternative to cash. In 2024, we launched the Digital Payments Roadmap to accelerate the adoption and use of digital payment channels. In 2024, the SADC RTGS, with its 88 participants across 15 countries, migrated to the ISO 20022 messaging standard, well ahead of the global November 2025 deadline. Now, as we look to 2025 and beyond, let's join in shaping the future of payments that is more inclusive, secure, and efficient.